Good afternoon, welcome back to Strasbourg, where I'm pleased to say the weather's improved. Next edition of our programme, the first part of which is going to focus on the agenda that we're dealing with this week, all of this week. I'm joined by Andrew Bronze MEP and Griffin MEP and our European advisor Andrew Moffat. We're going to plough through some of the agenda there, bringing you a few of the highlights, if you can call them highlights, about where we've gone in this session, things that are important, things that we think you back at home will be interested in. Andrew, will start off with a big debate here that we had about Turkey. You had quite an effective speech, which I gather has gone down very, very well in Greece and Cyprus already. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, possibly it didn't go down quite so well in Turkey, if it was known about. But, I mean, the debate was ostensibly just on the progress report towards Turkish membership of the EU, which of course we oppose. Turkey isn't a European country in any sense of the word, not even geographically, or only a tiny bit of it is. But of course our approach was to look at the report, and I picked out two particular sections of it. One thing said, and this is a glorious understatement, significant efforts are needed on fundamental rights. What that really means is that fundamental rights are trampled underfoot in Turkey. I gave the instance of Orhan Pamuk, a famous Turkish journalist, an author. No, I haven't read any of his books either, but I have heard of him. And he was threatened with prosecution because he claimed there was a massacre in 1915 of Armenians, and there's a Turkish law declaring it to be illegal to claim that there was a massacre of Armenians in 1915. It's rather more widely worded than that, but that's the effect of it. The only thing that prevented him from being prosecuted was his international fame. And in the end, the state backed off. But I asked a rather poignant question, and perhaps your viewers might like to consider this rather slowly. I asked the question, could the EU possibly tolerate the suppression of heretical academic opinion in any EU state? Well, let them think about that. The other obstacle I raised was the fact that, well, I'll read from the report, there is no progress towards normalisation of relations with Cyprus. Well, that's a wonderful understatement, a wonderful euphemism. In ordinary language, it means that Turkey, with force of arms, occupies the northern third of Cyprus. And it doesn't just occupy it, but we've seen an exhibition in this Parliament in which it's been shown that they've expropriated the property of Greek Cypriots. They've simply been expelled and their property taken over by the Turks. They've desecrated their places of worship and plundered them of their riches, and even desecrated their burial grounds. I mean, this is absolutely appalling for any so-called civilised country, and candidate to join the European Union with its so-called European values is absolutely appalling. In fact, I said unless Turkey withdraws its troops unconditionally and indeed returns the stolen property and repairs the damaged property, there shouldn't be any relations with Turkey at all, let alone talking about Turkey joining the EU. No,
it was a very well delivered speech. I wasn't aware that you were going to do that. It was one of the speeches I hadn't been involved in, and it really did sink home. You could tell it was one of the things that really sunk home. But Nick, you've been to the exhibition that Andrew referred to about the destruction in northern Cyprus. Yeah. Tell us more, because we don't really, the general public would have no idea about this, would they?
They won't. We have covered it, I think, on one of the previous programmes, so I won't talk too much about the exhibition because that's a little bit in the past, but in simple terms, there are hundreds of churches in Turkish-occupied northern Cyprus which have been either completely destroyed or turned into things such as nightclubs, animal stables, military bases. One of them even was discovered to have been turned into a morgue for Muslims, and not just the churches, also the graveyards of all the different Christian sects, and also from old synagogues there as well, all of them desecrated. The artwork stolen and sold abroad. Absolutely appalling cultural destruction of churches which in many cases have survived since the 6th century. So they'd survived all the occupation by the Ottoman Turks, but this is something now much more aggressive and anti-Christian and anti-European. But interestingly, I've had a discussion just yesterday with one of the, in effect, civil servants here, who's part of the delegation which regularly goes to examine what's going on in Cyprus. He'd just come back, so there were some new things. He was saying that the European Union, i.e. the British taxpayer, has poured huge amounts of money into northern Cyprus, which the Turks claim has been used to rebuild churches and restore graveyards. None of it's happened. So the only church they could find which has been rebuilt as a market. So it's not there for the Christians. There was an incident they were told about in Christmas where the priest of one of the few remaining Christian enclaves in the north was basically attacked by soldiers in his church and forced to remove his vestige states of the former Soviet Union, Turkmenistan and so on. And so Turkey is looking more towards them. But if Turkey was brought into the EU, it wouldn't just be the Turks, it would be these additional 40 million. And everywhere where their borders run, say, to Iran, as a for instance, then there's a porous border between the expanded European Union and really the third world proper. So it's not just the Turkish population, there's almost a limitless number of Middle Easterners and Muslims who would pour in through Turkey if the peoples of Europe were daft enough to allow the bureaucrats here to bring the Turks in.
Yeah. Well, you say the peoples of Europe, it's not just the peoples of Europe, it's our own political parties. The Conservative Party is very much in favour of expanding membership.
Be surprised to find out when we have at home people like Cameron and Hague posing almost as very kind of conservative, sensible about immigration. When these people get here, and their advocates get here, it's a completely different story, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a completely different story. On that subject, it's a bit of an international flavour that we've had to deal with. There's not too much that really affects home policy, but this Roma inclusion measure, which we've been absolutely fascinated by the sheer depth of politically correct extremism within this. It is almost beyond belief.
It's inventive, isn't it?
It's really almost beyond belief. We could spend a whole programme telling you about some of the things that have been suggested about how forcing small businesses to accept bribes to employ Roma and whatever. It is almost beyond belief. But
not so much an issue of mental illness,
yes.
A sort of obsessive-compulsive illness. The way I summed it up is the word on everybody's lips, whatever the subject they happen to be talking about, is Roma. You expect almost anything on the most abstruse subjects to come full circle and end up talking about the Roma. I almost felt when we were appointing, or in our case, trying not to appoint, one of the auditors, I expected somebody at some stage to shout out and say, why wasn't there a Roma candidate?
It is. I mean, we laugh about it, but I mean, in report after report, we find a reference to the Roma. I mean, it's in defence of themselves, it's incredibly patronising and condescending, isn't it?
Yes. In fact, I said in one of my committees, I think it must be 2 or 3 months ago, it was in Libe, I said, whenever we hear about the Roma, we hear about things that either haven't been done for them or need to be done for them, as though they were sort of inanimate objects that had to have things done to them. And it really suggests that they have no responsibility themselves for the position in which they find themselves, and no possibility whatsoever of getting out of that position. It really is, when you think about it, and if the people who suggest these measures ever really did look at their own ideas critically, it really does suggest that they're people entirely incapable of self-decision.
Well, a friend of mine was in Birmingham shopping a few days ago and was pickpocketed by one of them. So I think that one probably did have some responsibility for their actions, and it's not up for us. Just one thing I would suggest, here's a prediction. I predict that we'll hear less about the Roma in a few months' time, because I think we're going to be hearing huge amounts in this place about how they've got to save and help and integrate and throw taxpayers' money at refugees from the Middle East.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Andrew Moffat, we've been pouring through some of this legislation on Roma inclusion, as they call it. I mean, roughly, how much money do you think is involved with this?
It's a bottomless pit, really. I mean, if some of these measures are translated into national law, and small and medium-sized enterprises and even micro businesses are forced to employ these people, they're going to be burdened with an enormous welter of red tape and so on. So it's a cost to business, it's a cost to local government, it's a cost to national government. Who could say, probably across the EU, billions at a time of recession. It's not just Roma, of course. I'm just looking at a document here. They're talking about disabled, elderly, immigrant, lesbian, bisexual, transgender and minority women. And you know, you come in here and sometimes you scratch your head, if you're one of the sane people, and you think, am I really mad, or is the system taking control of me? And it rather reminds me of the psychiatric ward they had in the Soviet Union, when sane people who questioned the system were put in and given a terrible mixture of drugs and so on, which induce pain and sleeplessness and all sorts of things. And you know, you really wonder, is this a repeat of the Soviet Union? Is it going to happen here as well? It always starts somewhere. Yeah. One rather remembers Pastor Neumiller, wasn't it, in Germany? And it's got to start somewhere. Well, we've seen it, and we're well into the project. Where's this going to end?
See, what was just described there, it's not just the issue of money. That's obviously where people are focused. You know, the cost on small businesses if they're forced to take Roma or whoever, whatever minority they're being forced. It's the principle of a superstate, that, you know, not even a state, a superstate claiming to itself and appropriating to itself the right to interfere in businesses to the extent of saying who they must employ. In other words, a businessman or businesswoman, they're no longer running their business. They're merely, in effect, the operatives, unpaid operatives, in fact. So they get taxed rather than paid. They're the unpaid operatives for a sort of stealth nationalisation, because they don't come along and say, this business is now ours. They simply say, it's yours, but you must do exactly what you tell us. It's a really, really sinister thing, because it is a return of wholesale nationalisation of everything, but purely by that back door. At least in the old days, the state also took financial responsibility when they nationalised a business. Here, what they're looking to do is to take control, but with no financial responsibility at all. While your business is making a profit, you must use those profits to employ the people we tell you. But if it ceases to make a profit and you go bust, you're on your own. It really is evil.
Yeah. Well, there's two other points here as well. The first thing is that many of the legislators, including the Commission, which is where legislation arises, none of them have ever been involved in business. None of them have ever created any wealth. It's the ordinary taxpayer who has to pay for these fellows. The second thing is, this is all rather reminiscent of Frankfurt School principles, to create minority sectional interest groups and to set them against the centre, to create grievances. Ultimately, it balkanises the nation state, it wears it down. Dealing with all of these different minority groups, dealing with contrived grievances and so on, and it's designed specifically to erode the nation state. I think you're more expert than I am in that.
I mean, on a more practical side, we have a way of dealing with these various begging letters, which is what in effect they are, begging letters for money from pet minorities. And I always envisage a little old lady in the winter who's lost her husband, who's probably gone through the war, and she's got a pound coin in her hand and she doesn't know whether to make herself a cup of tea, feed herself, or feed the electricity meter. So when these things come up, put in front of my eyes, and indeed your eyes, Andy, there's a line straight through, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have our own people to look after first. We mentioned North Africa, the Middle East. We've got resolutions coming up about Libya and Iran. We've got form, if you like, about speaking about proposed plans on Iran. Andrew, you're probably going to have
I'm going to try and catch the eye this afternoon on it. Lest anybody think that I might be an Iranophile or particularly a sort of admirer of the present system, I'm not. I don't like their theocratic society. I certainly don't like its sort of anti-democratic aspect. And it's certainly not a place that I would want to go on holiday, let alone live there. But that's not the point. We don't start wars against countries because we disapprove of them, disapprove of their society, or disapprove of their governments. Remember, it's only, 7-8 years ago that Britain and the United States declared war, an entirely illegal and aggressive war against Iraq, on account of non-existent weapons of mass destruction. Now we're told that Iran is building a nuclear bomb. Who says so? Well, their opponents say so. Why do they say so? Because they want to declare war on Iran. And it's a thoroughly immoral policy to wage war against countries that haven't taken any military action against the aggressor. It's utterly hideous.
It certainly is. I mean, we're looking at some of the... It is tub-thumping warmongering, that's what it is. I mean, you can see that in some of these reports. But, Nick, this whole flare-up in North Africa, the Middle East, is bringing into our realms the peak oil scenario, isn't it? We've already had huge fluctuations, increases in the price of oil. And where do you think... You've developed a bit of an expertise in peak oil, energy, rare materials and whatever. Where do you think we're going with this? What is it, the worst case scenario, best case scenario?
The worst case scenario is probably flagged up in one of the WikiLeaks leaks, where one of the cables, which has now come out, was a senior official working with Aramco, which is the Saudi Arabian oil company, basically admitting that they've got some 40% less oil in reserve than they've always told us. This is because the OPEC rules are that the more you have in reserve, the more you can produce. So they've all lied about how much they've got. But this is what the peak oilers have said for a number of years, in fact, where real geologists have said, look, they haven't got that much. And this really strongly implies, in fact, that what's going on, when you've got the CIA, and again, WikiLeaks have exposed it, spending years undermining their own despots like Mubarak and the people running Tunisia and so on, and having revolutions which, as we now see in Libya, appear to be sliding into total chaos, it really, with me, raises the strong possibility that the actual intention here is to so destabilise the Middle East that American troops and British troops on their coattail, if we've got any left by the time Cameron and Co have finished, will simply go in and seize the oil, because one of the key problems in terms of oil supply for particularly the United States, which uses far more than we do per head of population, isn't just that the supply of good Middle Eastern crude has peaked and is now tailing off quite rapidly. That's not all of it. It's that as those countries westernise and develop, they're using far more of their oil at home. So as well as there actually being less of it flowing from those countries, they're also using more at home. And that is going to not just damage America, it's going to literally destroy the whole fiat money system. We can't get into all that now. But the fiat money system, creating money as an interest-bearing debt, you have to have economic growth, because otherwise you can't pay the principal back and the interest as well. That's what this is really about. I think that they're going to go into the Middle East to seize the oil in order to keep the world banking system going, and they're going to use our boys and girls, underpaid, under-equipped, as part of that military force. It's an absolute nightmare building up.